Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had the power to speak to future versions of himself. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The front door clicked shut with a sound that was too quiet, too final. It was the sound of a lock tumbling into place, sealing Izuku Midoriya inside with the ghosts of a day he wished he could forget. Each step he took across the Genkin felt heavy, as if the soles of his red sneakers had been filled with lead. He could still feel the phantom heat on his shoulder where the explosion had singed his uniform, the acrid smell of burnt sugar, and Bakugo's rage clinging to his senses. If you want to be a hero so bad, there's a quick way to do it. Believe that you'll have a quirk in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof. The words echoed in his head, not with the loud, abrasive boom of their initial delivery, but with the insidious, persistent hiss of a venomous snake. They coiled around his heart, squeezing until the ache was a physical presence in his chest. He'd known Kakin his whole life. He'd seen his anger, his pride, his casual cruelty, but this was a new depth. A casual dismissal of his very existence. Izuku? Is that you, sweetie? His mother's voice, warm and laced with a perpetual tremor of worry, drifted from the kitchen. It was the only warmth in the apartment. Yeah, Mom. I'm home. He called back, his own voice a reedy imitation of its usual self. He forced himself to move, to go through the motions. Shoes off, placed neatly by the door. School bag slung over a shoulder that felt impossibly burdened. He walked into the living area, a space dominated by the vibrant, smiling visage of one man, All Might. Posters of the symbol of peace covered nearly every inch of his bedroom walls, but they spilled out here, too. A limited edition Silver Age All Might clock ticked on the wall, its heroic arms serving as the clock hands. All Might-themed coasters sat on the coffee table. The entire apartment was a shrine to a dream that, today, felt like a cruel joke. Izuku's eyes landed on a poster from All Might's debut, the hero carrying a busload of people from a fiery wreck, his smile a sunbeam cutting through the smoke. The tagline read, "I am here, but you're not," Izuku thought, a bitter tide rising in his throat. You're not here. And I'm nowhere. He mumbled a greeting to his mother as he passed the kitchen. The rich, savory aroma of katsudon, his favorite, his celebration meal, filled the air. The scent, usually a comfort, made his stomach clench. A celebration of what? Surviving another day of being quirkless, useless Deku? Of being told to kill himself by the person he once called his friend. He shut his bedroom door, and the silence was suddenly deafening. He let his bag slide to the floor with a heavy thud. The room was his sanctuary and his prison. Here, surrounded by the proof of heroism, he felt the gulf between his reality and his aspirations as a physical chasm. He sank into his desk chair, the cheap plastic groaning under his weight. The computer screen was open to a news forum dissecting the fight from earlier that day. Kamui Woods, Mount Lady, Backdraft, a pantheon of gods at work, and then there was him, the pathetic worshipper, scribbling notes from the sidelines. His gaze fell upon the stack of notebooks on his desk. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. His hand trembled as he reached for it. The cover was slightly charred at the corner. He remembered the splash of water, the sizzle as it hit the koi pond, Kakin's sneering laughter. He had fished it out, cradling the damp, ruined pages like a fallen comrade. He opened it. The ink had bled, blurring his meticulous drawings and frantic scrawls into abstract watercolor paintings of failure. He had spent hours on that analysis of Mount Lady's quirk, theorizing its limitations regarding structural integrity in dense urban environments. Now, it was just a soggy mess. A perfect metaphor. He pushed it aside and grabbed a fresh notebook, Volume 14. The crisp, clean pages were a stark contrast to his own frayed spirit. He uncapped a pen. For a moment, he just stared at the empty page, the blinking cursor on his computer screen, the smiling hero on his wall. A familiar, desperate energy began to thrum beneath his skin. It was the only defense he had against the crushing despair. If he couldn't have power, he would have knowledge. He would analyze. He would theorize. He would find a loophole in reality itself if he had to. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his pen scratching across paper in a feverish tandem. He wasn't just analyzing heroes anymore. His search queries became more and more esoteric. Quirkless hero support gear, vigilantism laws in Japan, effectiveness of non-lethal weaponry against Kyoka-type quirks, case studies of quirkless police officers in combat situations. He was looking for a crack. A sliver of a possibility. A path that everyone else had overlooked. His room was a cocoon of frantic energy. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that he didn't see. The all-might clock's arms swept past dinner time. A soft knock came at the door. Izuku? Dinner's ready. It's your favorite. He flinched, torn from his hyperfocused state. Oh. Okay, Mom. I'll be right there. He didn't move. He couldn't. The thought of facing her, of seeing the gentle pity in her eyes, was too much. He knew she saw his notebooks and his posters not as a passion, but as a symptom of a painful delusion. He heard her sigh softly from the other side of the door, a sound of deep, maternal sorrow, before her footsteps receded. Guilt twisted in his gut, a sharper pain than even Bakugo's words. He was hurting her too. His impossible dream was a burden on them both. He turned back to his work, the desperation now tinged with self-loathing. He pulled up old schematics for support items used by heroes with non-physical quirks. He sketched out grappling hooks, smoke pellets, high-tension wire launchers. Could he build them? Maybe. Could he use them effectively against someone like the sludge villain? Against a real threat? The answer was a cold, hard no. He was a scrawny 14-year-old with below-average athleticism and a history of being the first one knocked down in any conflict. All the knowledge in the world couldn't change the fundamental equation. A hero needed to be able to save people. And to save people, you had to be strong. The hours bled into one another. The digital clock on his screen flipped past midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2 a.m. His eyes burned, gritty and dry. His notes became less coherent, his handwriting devolving into a spidery scrawl. His search for a loophole had led him down 1,000 dead ends. Every article, every video, every forum post ultimately came back to the same unspoken truth. In this world, power was the price of admission. And he was bankrupt. Finally, at some forgotten hour when the world outside was utterly still and dark, his body gave out. His mind was a maelstrom of data, anxieties, and the lingering echo of a boy telling him to die. But his physical form had reached its limit. His head grew heavy, his eyelids drooping like lead curtains. The words on the screen swam together, forming a meaningless river of light. His pen slipped from his numb fingers, rolling off the desk and hitting the floor with a soft clatter he barely registered. His cheek found the hard, cool surface of his desk, his breath fogging a small patch of the wood. Exhaustion, profound and absolute, pulled him under. It wasn't a gentle drift into slumber. It was a sudden, complete system failure. He fell into a blackness deeper and more complete than any he had ever known. There was no sensation of falling. No dreamy transition. One moment, he was slumped over his desk in Yuzurifu, Japan. The next, he simply was. He was standing. Or floating. He couldn't be sure. Below his feet was a surface that looked like polished obsidian, reflecting a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light. Yet he could see. There was no sun, no moon, no lamp, but a soft, ambient luminescence permeated the space, emanating from nothing and everything at once. It was the light of a perpetual twilight. He looked up. There was no sky, only an endless continuation of the same oppressive gloom. The air was still and cool, carrying no scent. There was no sound but the frantic, rabbit-quick beat of his own heart, which seemed to echo in the vast emptiness. Where am I? He whispered, his voice sounding small and fragile. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his consciousness. Was this it? Was this what came after? Had he taken Kaken's advice without even realizing it? Did he fall asleep and just not wake up? Is this a dream? He asked the emptiness, needing to hear a voice, even his own. He pinched his arm hard. He felt it, a sharp, definite sting. So, not a dream. Or at least, not a normal one. A villain's quirk, then? Had someone abducted him in his sleep? His mind, ever the analyst, began cycling through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. You're asking the right questions. The voice was not his own. It was close, resonant, and calm. It held a familiar timbre, like a song heard in his childhood, but it was deeper, steadier, laced with a confidence Izuku had only ever dreamed of possessing. He whipped around. Standing about 15 feet away, as if he had been there the entire time, was a young man. He looked to be 16, maybe 17. He was taller than Izuku, with a broader frame. His shoulders were set in a posture of relaxed readiness, his hands resting casually in the pockets of what looked like a school uniform. It was hard to tell. The details were maddeningly blurry, shifting and indistinct, like a photograph struggling to come into focus. Izuku could make out the dark green-gray fabric, the tie, the blazer, but the iconic school emblem he instinctively looked for was a smudge of incomprehensible color. The young man's hair was the same untamable forest green mop as his own, but it seemed to frame a face that had shed its round, boyish softness. His jaw was sharper, his freckles standing out against skin that held a healthier, more vibrant tone. But it was his eyes that held Izuku captive. They were the same emerald green, but they weren't wide with panic or wet with unshed tears. They were clear, focused, and they held a profound, aching sadness as they looked at him. Who are you? Izuku stammered, taking a half-step back. The figure offered a small, sad smile. I'm the answer to the question you keep screaming into the void, he said, his voice gentle. I'm the hope you're about to lose. Izuku's mind whirred. The voice, the hair, the eyes. It was impossible. It was ludicrous. But in this impossible, ludicrous place, it was the only explanation that began to make a sliver of sense. You're me? The older boy nodded slowly. A version of me. A possible me. Let's just say I'm a little further down the road. A future version of himself. A quirk. He had a quirk. All this time, he had a quirk. The irony was so bitter, so overwhelming, that a hysterical laugh bubbled up in Izuku's chest. He choked it down, the sound coming out as a strangled sob. A quirk, he repeated, the words tasting like ash. All this time, and it's this? A parlor trick? A weird dream? This can't help anyone. This can't save anyone. He gestured wildly at the empty void around them. What good is this? The future Izuku's expression didn't change. Its name is Nexus, he said calmly. And its usefulness depends entirely on you. Right now you think it's useless because you're asking the wrong questions. You're looking for the wrong kind of power. The accusation stung. The wrong kind of power? I want the power to save people. Like All Might. What's wrong with that? Nothing, the future self replied, taking a step closer. The blur around his form seemed to intensify, a visual representation of some unseen rule. But you're going about it like a scientist trying to solve an equation. You think if you can just find the right variable, the right piece of gear, the right loophole, the answer will be hero. That's not how it works. He was quoting Izuku's entire life, his entire methodology, back at him. Every notebook, every late night, every desperate search query. It was all just solving an equation. So what do I do? Izuku pleaded, his voice cracking. This was it. The answer. His future self was here to give him the cheat codes to life. Tell me. How do I become you? How do I get into that uniform? Do I get a quirk? A real one? One that does something? The future Izuku's smile faded completely, replaced by a look of deep solemnity. He shook his head, a gesture that sent a spear of ice through Izuku's heart. I can't tell you that. There are rules to this. The future isn't a book you can read ahead in. It's a path you have to walk. I can't give you spoilers, Izuku. It would change the path. It might even erase it. Erase me? Despair crashed over him again, heavier than before. Then what's the point? Why are you here if you can't help me? He yelled, tears finally breaking free, tracing hot tracks down his cold cheeks. To show me what I can't have? To mock me? No, the older Izuku said, his voice firm, cutting through the self-pity. I'm here to give you a compass, not a map. You're lost in the woods, looking at the ground for a key you dropped, when you should be looking at the trees to find your way out. He paused, letting the metaphor sink in. Izuku's crying subsided to ragged breaths, his mind latching onto the words, analyzing them. Listen to me, Izuku. Listen very carefully, the future self said, his gaze intense. You're right. As you are now, you can't be a hero. Not the kind you want to be. Not the kind the world will need. Every word was a hammer blow, cracking the fragile shell of his hope. This was his own future self confirming his deepest fear. But the figure continued, raising a hand before Izuku could shatter completely. That's only true for the you of this moment. You are fixated on the endpoint, on the finish line. You've forgotten that every hero has a beginning. An origin. He took another step closer. You're looking for a key, but you need to become a worthy vessel first. The words hung in the silent air. Vessel. A container. Something made to hold something else. Stop analyzing from the outside, the future Izuku commanded, his voice gaining a new, urgent strength. All those notebooks, they're brilliant, but they're the work of a spectator. You have to stop being a fan and start being a participant. Stop writing about heroes and start building one. He gestured, not at the void, but at Izuku himself. At his own thin arms and narrow chest. Start building, he repeated, his voice lowering to an intense, focused whisper. Your body and your spirit. Your body is weak from disuse. Your spirit is drowning in despair. You can't house a great power in a broken container. You can't light a great fire with damp kindling. So build the vessel. Forge the spirit. Make yourself strong. Not just on paper. For real. The advice was so simple, so direct, it was revolutionary. All his life, he'd been told his body didn't matter because he was quirkless. The physical aspect was for those with emitter or transformation quirks. His domain was his mind. But this flipped the script entirely. When? Izuku asked, his voice barely audible. How long? That's not the right question, the future self chided gently. The answer is now. And until. That's all you need to know. A new feeling was starting to push through the despair. A tiny, fragile seedling of purpose. It wasn't the explosive joy of discovering a quirk. It was something quieter, deeper. It was the feeling of being handed a blueprint and a set of tools. The work would be hard, grueling, maybe impossible. But it was work. It was a task. It was a path. There's one more thing, the future Izuku said, and his form began to flicker, the edges wavering like a heat haze. The twilight of the void seemed to dim. The connection is fading. Wait! Izuku cried, reaching out. You said I need to be a vessel. A vessel for what? The older boy's eyes, even as his face began to blur, held a glint of something profound. A shared secret across time. Be ready when he finds you. The words were cryptic, frustrating, and yet they sparked with an undeniable significance. He. A specific person. Who? Izuku demanded. Who finds me? All Might? Is it All Might? The future self just gave that same sad, knowing smile. His form was dissolving now, breaking apart into motes of twilight dust. His voice was a fading echo, but his final words were the clearest, most powerful of all. They bypassed Izuku's ears and imprinted directly onto his soul. Don't wait to be chosen, Izuku. Make yourself the only choice. And with that final, resounding command, the obsidian floor gave way. The void shattered. The world rushed back in a torrent of sensation, the hard pressure of the desk against his cheek, the stale air of his room, the low hum of his computer, the distant, lonely sound of a truck on a far-off street. Izuku gasped, his body jerking upright with such violence that his chair screeched back and nearly toppled over. He was drenched in a cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His breath came in huge, shuddering gulps. He blinked, his eyes struggling to adjust to the familiar clutter of his bedroom. It was real. All of it. The posters, the notebooks, the faint scent of katsudon he'd never eaten. But the other place, the Nexus, it felt more real than any dream he had ever had. The voice, the face, the feeling of those words. It was seared into his memory. Before the details could fade, before his logical mind could dismiss it as a stress-induced hallucination, he acted. His body moved with a purpose it hadn't possessed just minutes before. He scrambled for the pen that had fallen to the floor, snatched a new notebook from his bag, not a hero analysis one, but a plain one, its cover a stark, blank black. He flipped it open to the first page and began to write, his hand flying across the paper with a desperate urgency. Quirk identified? He wrote the words, then underlined them 3 times. Name, Nexus, as stated by. Future me? Activation condition. Seemingly requires extreme mental/physical exhaustion. Uncontrolled. Effect. Creates a mental space outside of normal time/space. Allows for communication with a future version of myself. Limitations/rules observed. 1. Future self, FS, cannot give direct spoilers. Information is metaphorical, or advisory in nature. 2. The further into the future, the more distorted the connection. Hypothesis. His uniform was blurry for a reason. A temporal law? 3. Connection has a time limit. Unstable. Below that, he wrote down the conversation, transcribing every word he could remember, his own frantic questions and the calm, world-altering answers. Vessel. Build your body and your spirit. Stop being a spectator. Be ready when he finds you. Make yourself the only choice. He stared at the phrases. They were a puzzle. A mission brief. Build your spirit was abstract. How does one do that? He supposed overcoming the despair that had crushed him moments ago was a start. The very act of doing this, of believing in this insane, impossible experience, felt like the first step. Build your body, however, was concrete. Tangible. Actionable. His eyes drifted from the notebook to his own reflection in the dark computer screen. He saw a boy with slumped shoulders, a thin neck, and arms with no discernible muscle. A boy whose only exercise was running from bullies and running toward hero fights. A vessel? He looked more like a sieve. A broken one. Make yourself the only choice, the command echoed. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. A gauntlet thrown down across time. Don't hope for a miracle. Become the miracle. Don't wait for someone to give you a chance. Force their hand. Make your own readiness, your own strength, so undeniable that to choose anyone else would be unthinkable. A fire ignited in his chest. It wasn't the hot, destructive rage of Bakugo's quirk. It was a steady, determined flame, burning away the cold dread and the bitter self-pity. For the first time in a long, long time, he felt a flicker of genuine, unadulterated hope. It wasn't the flimsy, daydream hope that All Might would one day notice him. It was a rugged, functional hope, built on a foundation of clear instruction. He stood up, his movements crisp. He looked at the All Might poster again. The hero's smile didn't seem like a distant, unattainable ideal anymore. It looked like a goal. A destination. And now, for the first time, he had a road to walk. His gaze swept his room and landed on a photo on his bulletin board. It was a class trip from a few years ago, taken at a park overlooking the ocean. In the background, visible behind the smiling children, was the coastline. And on that coastline was the blight of their city, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. Once a beautiful shoreline, it had become an illegal dumping ground over the years, a mountain range of rusted appliances, broken furniture, and tangled mountains of garbage, all lapped by a polluted sea. He remembered All Might in an old interview, lamenting the decline in civil service and community pride, using that very beach as an example. True heroism, All Might had said, is also found in the small acts of improving the world around you. Build the vessel. We're better to do it. To clean that beach would be a Herculean task. It would take strength, endurance, and a will of iron. It was a physical challenge of immense proportions. And in cleaning a part of his city that had been forgotten and left to rot, maybe he could clean out the parts of his own spirit that had suffered the same fate. It was a perfect synthesis of the advice. Build the body. Build the spirit. The digital clock on his desk read 3:47 a.m. The world was asleep. But Izuka Midoriya had never felt more awake. He moved quietly through the apartment, his earlier lethargy completely gone, replaced by a thrumming, nervous energy. He pulled on a pair of old, worn-out sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. He found a pair of thick work gloves his mother kept under the sink for gardening. Then, he laced up his red sneakers, the ones that had carried him through so many days of mediocrity. Today, they would carry him toward a purpose. He scribbled a quick, vague note for his mom. Went for an early morning run. Be back for school. Izuku. And left it on the kitchen table next to the cold plate of katsudon. He felt a pang of guilt, but it was overshadowed by the overwhelming need to act. He slipped out the front door, the click of the lock now sounding like the start of a race. The pre-dawn air was cool and crisp against his face. The streets were empty, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting. He started to jog, his pace awkward at first, his lungs already protesting. He ignored it. He ran through the sleeping neighborhoods, his destination a clear and unshakable point on his mental map. 40 minutes later, gasping for breath and with a stitch burning in his side, he arrived. He stood on the crumbling concrete retaining wall, looking down at the disaster that was Dagoba Beach. It was worse up close. The sheer scale of the junk was staggering. A mountain of discarded history, rusted cars, gutted televisions with shattered screens like dead eyes, tangled nests of rebar and wire, rotting piles of household trash that filled the air with a sour, foul stench. The ocean waves, dark and heavy, lapped listlessly against the shore, pushing bits of plastic and styrofoam back and forth in a tired, endless rhythm. It was an impossible task. Utterly, completely impossible for one scrawny, quirkless boy. The despair he'd felt earlier tried to creep back in, a cold whisper telling him he was a fool. That this was a joke. Then, he remembered the voice. Make yourself the only choice. He looked at the mountain of trash. Then he looked at his own hands, small and calloused only from holding a pen. He was the boy who couldn't. He was Deku. No, he was the boy who was going to try. He scrambled down the embankment, his sneakers slipping on loose gravel. He landed on the sand, the foul air filling his lungs. He walked over to the nearest large object, an old, monstrously heavy washing machine, its white enamel peeling to reveal a skeleton of rust. He wrapped his arms around it, planted his feet, and pulled. It didn't budge. Not a millimeter. His arms strained, the muscles he barely had screaming in protest. His back arched. It was like trying to pull a mountain out of the earth. Failure. Immediate, total failure. Tears of frustration pricked his eyes. The whisper of despair grew louder, but then, another voice pushed through. His own. Stop analyzing from the outside, he muttered to himself, his breath fogging in the cool air. He was approaching this like his old self, trying to solve the whole equation at once. He let go of the washing machine. He looked around. He couldn't move the big things. Not yet. But there were smaller things. A discarded tire. A broken chair. Countless bags of trash. He walked over to a half-buried truck tire, its rubber cracked and faded. He grabbed it with his gloved hands, dug his fingers in, and pulled. It was heavy, awkward, and resisted, held fast by the sand. He grunted, his face turning red with effort. He put his back into it, his legs shaking. For a moment it held firm. But then, with a sucking sound, it tore free from the sand. He stumbled back, the tire landing with a heavy thud at his feet. He stood there, panting, his arms and back on fire. He had done it. He had moved one thing. It was a tiny victory in the face of an insurmountable war. It was one drop of water in an empty ocean. It was utterly insignificant, and it was everything. Izuku Midoriya looked at the single tire he had moved. He looked at the endless mountain of trash that remained. And for the first time in his entire life, he didn't see the impossibility. He saw the path. With a determined grunt, he bent down, grabbed the tire, and began the long, arduous process of dragging it up the embankment, one grueling inch at a time. The sun had not yet risen, but in the heart of Izuku Midoriya, the dawn was already breaking. He was no longer waiting to be chosen. He was building the vessel. He was taking the first step. The moon was a cold, silver sickle in the sky, and the only sounds were the rhythmic sigh of the polluted tide and the tortured groan of straining muscle. For 3 months, this had been Izuku Midoriya's secret world. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, a testament to societal neglect, and the unlikely crucible where he was attempting to forge himself into something new. Each night, after his mother was asleep, he would slip out. Each morning, before the city truly woke, he would return, his body a symphony of aches, his hands raw even through his worn work gloves. He smelled perpetually of rust and brine. His school uniform, once loose, now fit snugly across his shoulders and back. He hadn't become a titan, but the soft, undefined lines of his body had been replaced by the wiry, dense cords of hard-earned muscle. He had calluses on his hands that had calluses of their own. Tonight's nemesis was a refrigerator from the last century, a behemoth of enameled steel that had half sunk into the wet sand like a metal tombstone. For a week it had defeated him. It was his white whale. "Come on!" he grunted, his voice a low growl that was foreign to his own ears. He had his back to it, a thick, frayed rope slung over his shoulders. His feet, dug into the sand, fought for purchase. "Make yourself the only choice," he chanted the words like a mantra. The ghost memory of his future self, the boy in the blurry uniform, was the fuel in his engine. He hadn't experienced the Nexus again. Not once. In the dark hours of the night, a sliver of doubt would sometimes whisper that it had all been a hallucination, a dream born of desperation. But then the sun would rise, and he would see the fruits of his labor, a slowly expanding patch of clean sand, a testament to his belief. He clung to that single, transformative conversation as a drowning man clings to a life raft. With a final, guttural roar that tore from his throat, he threw every ounce of his new strength into the effort. The rope bit into his shoulders. His legs trembled violently. For a second, nothing happened. The refrigerator, like the world itself, refused to yield. But then, with a sound like the world's worst tooth being pulled, it shifted. A deep, sucking groan echoed across the beach as it broke free from the sand's grip. Izuku staggered forward, dragging the metal monster a few precious feet before collapsing to his knees, gasping. The rope slid from his shoulders, and he fell onto his side in the sand, his chest heaving, his muscles screaming in a mixture of agony and triumph. He had done it. He lay there for a long time, watching his breath plume in the cool air, listening to the tide. He had cleared almost a third of his designated section. It was a staggering amount of work, an accomplishment that felt more real and more important than any test score or praise he had ever received. He had built this. With his own 2 hands he was building the vessel. The crawl back to his apartment was an exercise in pure willpower. By the time he slipped through his front door, the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky a soft, bruised purple. He showered in near silence, wincing as the hot water hit his raw muscles and scrapes. As he dressed for school, he caught his reflection. The change was undeniable. The hollow look of despair in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding exhaustion that was somehow satisfied. He looked tired, but he looked strong. Aldera Junior High was a different world. It was a place where his physical progress meant nothing. Here, he was not the boy who could move refrigerators. He was Deku, the quirkless wannabe. The transition was jarring. "Still scribbling in that creepy notebook, Deku?" A boy with extendable fingers sneered as he passed Izuku's desk. "Give it up already." Izuku didn't look up, his hand continuing its steady analysis of a new hero, Slipstream, whose quirk allowed her to reduce the friction of any surface she touched. 3 months ago, that comment would have made him flinch, would have sent a spike of shame through him. Now, it was just noise. A fly buzzing at the window of a fortress. He had a purpose they couldn't see, a secret strength they couldn't comprehend. The real test, as always, was Bakugo. Katsuki Bakugo watched him from across the room, his crimson eyes narrowed in a perpetual state of suspicious fury. He had noticed the change in Izuku. It was subtle, but it was there. The way Deku no longer flinched when he approached. The way he met his gaze for a split second before looking away, not with fear, but with something unreadable. The way he seemed to carry himself with a weight, a solidity, that hadn't been there before. It infuriated him. It was like a bug he'd stepped on 1,000 times had suddenly developed a shell. The final bell rang, and the teacher droned on about high school applications. "Ah, Midoriya, you want to go to UA too, don't you?" The class erupted in the expected cruel laughter. Izuku felt the heat rise in his cheeks, a familiar flush of humiliation. But this time, it was mixed with something else, a cold, hard defiance. He didn't say anything, just kept his eyes on his desk. He didn't need their approval. He just needed to keep building. As he was packing his bag, Bakugo slammed a hand on his desk, a small, warning explosion crackling in his palm. "Don't even think about it, Deku!" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "UA is for people who are gonna be number one. People with real power. You'd die in the exams, you quirkless idiot. Don't you dare stand in the same ring as me." Izuku finished sipping his bag and stood up. He looked Bakugo in the eye, and for the first time, there was no tremor in his posture. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply held his ground for a heartbeat, his gaze steady, before turning and walking away. The lack of a terrified, stammering response was more infuriating to Bakugo than any retort could have been. It was an act of silent rebellion. He was about to follow, to grab him, to blast that infuriatingly calm look off his face, when news alerts began to chime on everyone's phones. A villain attack. Downtown. Izuku's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, and his blood ran cold. The headline was stark. "Sludge villain holds middle schooler hostage near Takoba shopping arcade." The location, it was on his way home. His feet were moving before his brain had fully processed the thought. It was the old instinct, the magnetic pull of a hero fight. But as he ran, something was different. His strides were longer, more powerful. His lungs, conditioned by months of grueling labor, burned with a familiar fire but didn't give out. He was still frantic, still terrified, but his body was a more capable engine for his panicked mind. He arrived at the scene, pushing through the back of the crowd, and the sight stole the air from his lungs. It was a nightmare of fire, screaming, and chaos. The alleyway was blocked by flames. Death Arms was busy holding up a collapsing sign. Kamui Woods was evacuating civilians, his wood limbs useless against a fluid enemy. Backdraft was fighting a losing battle against the fires, and in the center of it all was the sludge villain, a monstrous, churning mass of filth and malice. And inside him, thrashing, exploding, was Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku's mind, the analyst, took over for a split second. Fluid body. Physical attacks are ineffective. Weakness? Eyes? Solid parts? The explosions are coming from the hostage. The villain is using the boy's quirk against his will, creating more chaos, keeping the heroes at bay. A perfect trap. But then he saw it. Past the rage, past the frantic explosions. He saw Bakugo's face. His mouth was twisted in a snarl, but his eyes were wide with a pure, undiluted terror Izuku had never seen in them before. They were pleading. Drowning. They were the eyes of a boy who was suffocating and knew he was about to die, and in that instant, the analyst vanished. The boy with a plan vanished. The vessel builder vanished. All that was left was a primal, screaming instinct. He needs to be saved. Before anyone could stop him, before his own mind could scream at him to stay put, Izuku burst through the crowd and sprinted toward the monster. He was a blur of green and black, a foolish, quirkless child running toward certain death. "Kid! No! Stop!" Death Arms yelled. Izuku didn't hear him. The world had narrowed to the monster and the boy inside. He didn't have a plan. He just had to do something. His mind flashed back to his notebook. Volume 13. Page 25. Kamui Woods. Preemptive binding. Lacquered chain prison. What do you do when you have nothing to attack with? You create an opening. His school bag. He swung it off his shoulder as he ran. His arm, conditioned by throwing tires and chunks of rusted metal, moved with a speed and precision he didn't know he possessed. He hurled the bag with all his might. It spun through the air and struck the villain squarely in its massive, bulbous eye. The monster roared in pain and surprise, its fluid body recoiling for a split second. It was the smallest of openings. A fraction of a second where its grip loosened. It was enough. Bakugo managed to wrench his mouth free, gasping for a precious lungful of air. Izuku didn't stop. He reached the villain and his hands, small but strong, began to claw desperately at the sludge encasing Bakugo's body. It was like trying to dig through thick, foul-smelling tar. It slipped through his fingers, resisting him, trying to swallow him too. "Kaken!" he screamed, his fingers finding purchase on Bakugo's uniform for a second. "What the hell are you doing here, Deku?" Bakugo choked out, his voice a mix of fury and terrified relief. "I don't know," Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the grime. "My legs, they just started moving." You looked like you were asking for help." That single, honest admission seemed to break something in the air. For all his weakness, for all his foolishness, he was the only one who had seen past the violent quirk and noticed the terrified boy inside. The sludge villain recovered its senses, its rage now focused on the small nuisance digging at its body. A massive tendril of sludge rose up, poised to slam down and crush Izuku. This was it. He was going to die. But as he looked at the descending blob of filth, a strange calm settled over him. He had tried. He had acted. He hadn't just watched. And then, a thunderous voice ripped through the chaos. "I really am pathetic." Izuku looked up, and his heart stopped. A figure stood there, smoke billowing from his frame, but there was no mistaking the silhouette. The two iconic tufts of hair, All Might. "I told you about the traits of a true hero." His voice boomed, directed at Izuku but echoing for all to hear. "But I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test." He grabbed onto Izuku and Bakugo, his hand a vice grip of safety. Detroit. Smash! The punch didn't even connect with the villain. The sheer force of the air pressure was enough. It was a hurricane contained in a fist. The sludge villain was blasted apart, splattering against the alley walls. The sky, which had been clear moments before, suddenly clouded over. A few drops of rain began to fall. He had changed the weather with a single punch. Izuku was on his knees, gasping, the adrenaline leaving him weak and trembling. He had been saved. They both had. By him. The aftermath was a blur of scolding and praise. The pro-heroes, after checking them over, chided Izuku harshly for his recklessness. "There was absolutely no reason for you to put yourself in danger like that, kid. You're lucky we were here to back up All Might." He just bowed his head, murmuring apologies. He deserved it. It was foolish. But then, as the heroes were distracted, he heard All Might giving an interview, and he saw Bakugo being praised for his bravery and his powerful quirk. No one mentioned that he had been the one to create the opening. No one mentioned that he was the only one who ran in. He trudged home, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He was glad Kakin was safe. Truly. But the hero's words stung. He was still just a liability. All his training, and in the end, he was just a damsel in distress who needed saving. "DKU!" He turned. Bakugo was running to catch up to him, his expression stormy. "I never asked for you to help me," he yelled, his voice rough. "And I didn't need it. I had him right where I wanted him. Don't you ever look down on me like that again. Got it? I'm fine on my own. I don't owe you anything." With that, he spun on his heel and stomped away, leaving Izuku alone on the empty street. Izuku watched him go, a small, sad smile touching his lips. That was Kakin's way of saying thank you. He understood. A sudden, explosive gust of wind announced a new arrival. "I am here!" All Might slid to a stop in front of him, striking a pose. "In a slightly different form," Izuku yelped, stumbling back. "All Might? What are you doing here? You were surrounded by reporters. Getting away from them is child's play for me," he boomed, laughing. "For I am the symbol of, act bluff," he deflated. In a puff of smoke, the mountain of muscle was gone, replaced by the skeletal, gaunt man Izuku had seen briefly before. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "Kid," the man, Toshinori Yagi, said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I've come to thank you." And to revise what I said earlier, they found a quiet side street, away from prying eyes. The towering form of All Might was gone, and with it, the untouchable aura of a god. This was a man, tired and wounded, who looked at Izuku with a new, profound intensity. "Your actions back there were reckless and dangerous," Toshinori began, his voice serious. "You could have been killed. Any sane person would have stayed back. But you, a timid, quirkless boy, you were the only one who acted. You spurred me to act." He looked down at his own thin hands. There are stories about all the great heroes. Most have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku's eyes widened. He remembered his own words to Bakugo. My legs, they just started moving. That's what happened to you back there, wasn't it? Toshinori asked, his hollow eyes seeming to see right through him. Izuku could only nod, his throat tight. Toshinori was silent for a long moment, the weight of a monumental decision settling around him. He looked at this boy who ran into danger, this boy who had been told he was worthless his whole life, and he saw the flickering ember he had been searching for. But there was more. The boy's words to the heroes after the fight, overheard by Toshinori. I know I'm not strong enough. Not yet. Not the words of someone who had given up. Kid, Toshinori said, his voice dropping. I deem you worthy. Izuku looked up, confused. Worthy? Of what? My power. The words didn't register at first. They were nonsense. A quirk was something you were born with. It couldn't be given. Listen, kid. My quirk isn't what the public thinks it is, Toshinori said, leaning against the wall. He told him everything. About the sacred torch, passed from one generation to the next. About its true name, one for all. About his injury, his time limit, and his long, arduous search for a worthy successor. Izuku's mind reeled. It was the secret origin of the number one hero, a secret that could shatter society, being laid bare in a dirty back alley. A power that cultivates, that can be passed on. Izuku murmured, his analytical mind kicking in despite the shock. That explains your incredible strength. It's the stockpiled power of generations of heroes. You catch on quick, Toshinori said with a weak smile. I've been searching for someone with the right spirit. A vessel strong enough to contain this power. And then, today, I saw it. You, with no power at all, were more of a hero than anyone else on that street. He looked at Izuku, his gaze piercing. But there's a choice to be made. It is a great burden, and a dangerous one. It is up to you. This was it. The moment his entire life, his every dream, had been leading up to. The offer of a lifetime. The key to the kingdom. And Izuku took a deep breath. He thought of the Nexus. He thought of the beach. He thought of the voice that had set him on this path. Make yourself the only choice. He looked All Might, Toshinori, square in the eye. The tears were there, but his voice, when he spoke, did not tremble. All Might-san, he began, his voice clear and steady. When you told me on that rooftop that I couldn't be a hero, you were right. Toshinori's eyes widened in surprise. This was not the reaction he expected. I know I can't be a hero, Izuku continued, his fists clenching at his sides. Not as I am. I know a hero needs a strong body and an unbreakable spirit. I've known that for months. What? Toshinori breathed. That's why I've been preparing, Izuku declared, his voice rising with a passion and conviction that stunned the number one hero into silence. Every single night for the past 3 months, I've been at Dagoba Beach. Cleaning it. Moving things no one thought could be moved. I've been trying to build myself into something stronger. I've been trying to forge myself into a proper vessel. The word hung in the air between them. Vessel. Toshinori stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. It was the exact terminology his own master, Nana Shimura, had used. A coincidence? No, this felt like something more. This wasn't just a fantasy dream. This was foresight. This was a drive that bordered on prophetic. The boy hadn't just run in today. He had been preparing for this moment, this type of moment, for months, without even knowing what he was preparing for. You've been cleaning the beach? Toshinori asked, his voice barely a whisper. It was a place that needed saving, and I was too weak to save it. So I started small, Izuku said, his gaze unwavering. I knew. I felt like if I could just make myself ready, an opportunity would come. I knew I couldn't wait to be chosen. He straightened his back, standing as tall as his small frame would allow, and delivered the final, impossible sentence. I had to make myself the only choice. Silence. Toshinori's mind was a whirlwind. This boy, this incredible boy. He hadn't just shown the spirit of a hero in one reckless moment. He had been living it, breathing it, in grueling, thankless, solitary labor for months. He understood the fundamental principle of one for all without ever having heard its name. He understood sacrifice, preparation, and the indomitable will required not just to wield power, but to earn it. The last vestiges of doubt in Tashinori's mind evaporated. This wasn't a gamble anymore. This wasn't an emotional choice. It was the clearest, most obvious answer the universe had ever given him. It was destiny, forged not by fate, but by the sheer, bloody-minded willpower of a 14-year-old boy. A broad, genuine smile, All Might's true smile, spread across Tashinori's gaunt face. Laughter bubbled up from his chest, a raw, wheezing sound that was full of disbelief and boundless joy. "A vessel!" he choked out, laughing. "You really are something else, kid!" Full of surprises, he wiped a tear from his eye. He looked at Izuku, his heart swelling with a pride and hope he hadn't felt in years. "You've already accepted, haven't you?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were just waiting for the offer." Izuku's own tears finally fell, tears of overwhelming, world-shattering relief. He nodded, unable to speak, a sob catching in his throat. "Yes," he finally managed to say, his voice thick. "Yes." Tashinori's smile was blinding. "Then welcome, young Midoriya, to the most difficult path you will ever walk." He looked Izuku up and down. "Your private training has given you a head start, but my training plan will be hell on earth. You'll have to clean that entire beach in 10 months to prepare your body to receive my quirk. Can you do it?" "Yes," Izuku cried, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "I'll do it. I'll exceed your expectations." The contract was sealed. The torch was promised. The future had arrived. The walk home was a dream. Izuku's feet barely seemed to touch the pavement. One for all. All Might's quirk. I'm going to be his successor. The words cycled through his brain, each one more impossible and more wonderful than the last. He had a training plan from All Might himself. He was going to UA. He was going to be a hero. He arrived home to a frantic Inko Midoriya, who hugged him so tightly he thought his ribs would crack. She had seen the news. She wept with relief that he was safe, and he held her, whispering reassurances, the new weight of his incredible secret settling upon his shoulders. That night, after a tearful dinner where he ate 3 bowls of katsudon, Izuku collapsed into bed. His body was a wreck from the day's events, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He fell asleep instantly, plunging once more into that deep, absolute blackness. He opened his eyes in the familiar, twilight void. The polished obsidian floor stretched into infinity beneath him. The air was cool and still. He was not afraid this time. He was expectant, and there he was. The future Izuku stood waiting for him, his hands in the pockets of his blurry UA uniform. The image was sharper this time. The details were less fluid. Izuku could almost make out the red of the tie, the crisp white of the shirt. His future self's face was clearer, too. The sad smile was still there, but it was softer, less pained. It was a smile of profound pride. "See?" the future boy said, his voice the same calm, resonant tone. It was all the confirmation Izuku needed. This was real. The Nexus was real. And it had guided him here. "I did it," Izuku said, his voice filled with awe. "I met him. He chose me." "You made him choose you," his future self corrected gently. "You laid the foundation. You built the vessel. He just recognized the work you had already done." Izuku looked down at his hands, then back at the older boy. "What now?" "This power, it's so much." "What do I do?" The future Izuku took a step closer, his form flickering slightly. "Now the real work begins," he said, his voice taking on a new seriousness. "The path ahead of you is harder than you can possibly imagine. You will break. You will bleed. You will fail. Many times." He met Izuku's gaze, his emerald eyes boring into his own. "One for all is a flame that has been passed down for generations. It is hope. It is power. It is a symbol. But it is not you." The words struck a chord deep inside Izuku. "Don't let it consume you," the future self warned. "Don't become a puppet for the power you wield. It is a tool, a gift. It is not your identity. You are Izuku Midoriya. You are the boy who analyzes, who cares too much, who runs in when everyone else runs away. You are the boy who cleaned a beach because a ghost told him to. A small, genuine smile touched the older boy's lips. Take the flame he gives you. But don't just inherit it. His form began to waver, the connection weakening. His final words echoed in the void, filled with the weight of a hard-learned lesson. Make it your own. The void dissolved, and Izuku woke up in his bed. The morning sun was streaming through his window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The All Might poster on his wall seemed to be smiling down at him. He didn't feel the shock or the frantic energy of his first awakening from the Nexus. He felt a deep, profound calm. The first echo had given him a path out of the darkness. This second echo had given him a compass for the journey ahead. Make it my own. He sat up. His body ached. The road ahead was long and filled with a hellish training regimen. But for the first time, he saw it clearly. He wasn't just going to be the 9th holder of One for All. He was going to be the first hero known as Deku. And he would start by conquering that beach, not just for All Might, but for himself. The vessel was ready. It was time to be filled with fire. The 10 months that followed his meeting with All Might were a blur of rust, sweat, and burning determination. Izuku Midoriya's life became a grueling, meticulously scheduled routine. School, homework, sleep, and the beach. Every other aspect of his existence was pared away, leaving only the essentials for his singular, all-consuming goal. His American Dream Plan, as All Might had cheerfully dubbed it, was a color-coded nightmare of caloric intake charts, sleep schedules, and exercise regimens that pushed his body to the absolute brink. He dragged refrigerators, hauled stacks of tires, carried splintered armoires on his back, his muscles screaming with every step. He didn't just clean the beach, he conquered it. All Might, in his skeletal form, was his constant, if often exhausted, companion. He coached, he corrected, he motivated. But more than that, he watched. He saw the boy not just follow the plan, but adapt it. Izuku would analyze the physics of a particular pile of junk, finding the optimal leverage point, the most efficient way to move it. He wasn't just building muscle. He was applying his analytical mind to the physical world in a way he never had before. He was, as the voice in the Nexus had told him, building the vessel and forging the spirit in tandem. On the final morning, the day of the UA entrance exam, the sun rose over a pristine, unrecognizable shoreline. Dagoba Beach was clean. Every last piece of garbage, every rusted hulk, every broken bottle had been hauled away. Izuku stood atop the last, massive pile of scrap metal loaded onto a truck, his back straight, his silhouette lean and powerful against the rising sun. He let out a roar of pure, unadulterated triumph, a sound that carried across the clean sand and out over the gentle waves. All Might, standing below, transformed into his muscle form, his booming laughter echoing Izuku's cry. "Oh my goodness!" he bellowed, snapping a picture with his phone. He looked at the boy, no, the young man, and his heart swelled with pride. Izuku had not just met his expectations, he had shattered them. "You did it, my boy," Toshinori said, reverting to his true form, a proud tremor in his voice. "You are truly a worthy vessel." He plucked a single strand of his golden hair. "Now for your reward." The moment was less glorious than Izuku had imagined. "Eat this." Izuku stared at the hair. "Ha! To inherit my power, you have to ingest some of my DNA," All Might explained nonchalantly. "Now hurry! We'll be late." Izuku, his mind still reeling from the sheer absurdity of it, hesitantly took the hair and swallowed it. It was anticlimactic, strange, and a little gross. But it was done. The torch, he presumed, was passed. He felt nothing. "Is it working?" he asked, flexing his hand, expecting a surge of crackling energy. "I don't feel any different." "Of course not. It has to be digested." All Might chuckled. "It'll kick in soon enough. Now go! Your future is waiting." The walk to the UA campus was surreal. He was actually here. The iconic U-shaped building loomed before him, a temple dedicated to his lifelong dream. He was about to walk through its gates, not as a spectator, but as a candidate. As he took a step forward, his foot caught on an uneven paving stone. He pitched forward, gravity taking hold, his face on a collision course with the ground. No! Not now! Not here! The first step to my dream, and I'm going to fall on my face. But he didn't fall. He just stopped, suspended in midair. He blinked, confused, and realized a girl with warm brown eyes and a permanent blush on her cheeks was holding a hand out towards him, her fingertips glowing with a soft pink light. "Whoa there! Are you okay?" she asked, her voice bright and cheerful. She touched her fingertips together. "Release." He landed softly on his feet. "Oh. Thank you. I'm so sorry," he stammered, his face burning. "It's my quirk." "Sorry for using it without asking," she said with a bright smile. "Nervous, huh?" "I'm super nervous." "Well, good luck in there." She gave him a small wave and hurried inside. He stood there, stunned. I talked to a girl. And he hadn't immediately imploded from anxiety. His spirit, it seemed, really was stronger. "Out of my way, Deku," the familiar, gravelly voice cut through his reverie. Bakugo strode past him, not even sparing him a glance. But Izuku saw the flicker of something in his eyes, shock, maybe even a hint of grudging respect, at seeing him actually here, at the gates of UA. He hadn't just talked a big game, he had shown up. Izuku took a deep breath, centered himself, and walked into the building, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The written exam was a breeze. His analytical mind, honed by years of obsessive note-taking, devoured the questions. But the practical exam was another beast entirely. Present mix orientation was a high-energy assault on the senses. He explained the premise: a massive, simulated urban environment filled with 4 types of villain bots, each worth a different number of points. The goal was to rack up as many points as possible by disabling them. A tall, serious-looking boy with engines in his calves stood up, chopping the air with his hand. "Excuse me. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. Yet you have only mentioned 3. Is this a misprint?" "And you," he declared, spinning around and pointing directly at Izuku. "You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting and unbecoming of a potential UE student. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave." The entire auditorium turned to stare at him. Izuku shrank in his seat, his face scarlet. The old Deku, the one who flinched and apologized for existing, was still in there somewhere. Present Mike calmed the situation down, explaining the 4th robot was the zero-pointer, a massive arena trap worth no points, meant to be avoided. A gimmick. As they were herded towards the massive gates of Battle Center B, Izuku's panic began to set in. He still felt nothing. One for All hadn't manifested. He was just Izuku Midoriya, a physically fit but still quirkless boy about to go up against giant robots. "Don't worry, kid," All Might's voice echoed in his memory. "It'll kick in. Probably in a moment of extreme desperation. Like, oh no, a robot is about to crush me, I'd better use my quirk." It was not a comforting thought. He saw the kind girl from the entrance, and started to walk over to thank her properly. But the serious boy with the engines, the one who'd called him out, stopped him. "Are you trying to distract that girl to sabotage her performance?" he accused, his voice stern. "That is hardly heroic behavior." Before Izuku could stammer out a defense, Present Mix's voice roared from the watchtower. "And start!" The massive gates slid open. Silence. Everyone looked around, confused. "What's the matter? There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run! Run!" The other candidates surged forward, a tidal wave of quirks and determination. Izuku was left standing in the dust, his heart pounding. He had to move. He sprinted into the mock city, his mind racing. The next few minutes were a blur of humiliation. Everywhere he turned, robots were being obliterated. A boy with a laser navel shot a 1-pointer. A student with explosive sweat, Bakugo, in a different battle center, blasted a 2-pointer to scrap. The kind girl from the entrance was tapping robots, sending them floating harmlessly into the air before they crashed down. And Izuku ran. He couldn't do anything. He saw a 1-pointer intense, preparing to punch it, to summon one for all through sheer will. Nothing happened. He dodged out of the way just as another candidate turned it into a pile of slag. He was scoreless. A failure. All that training, all that hope, for nothing. He was a spectator again, just like he'd always been. The thought was a dagger to his heart. The despair he had fought so hard to conquer began to creep back in, cold and familiar. 2 minutes left, 2 minutes. His dream was slipping through his fingers. He was going to fail. He was going to let all might down. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. A deep, grinding roar echoed through the concrete canyons of the fake city. Buildings shook, dust and debris raining down from above. From around a corner, a shadow fell over the street. It was colossal, a moving skyscraper of green metal and red optics. The zero-pointer. It was bigger than the buildings, a monster of apocalyptic proportions. The other students, even the powerful ones, turned and ran. It's the zero-pointer! Run for it! No points for that one! It's not worth it! Izuku was frozen in terror. This was it. The manifestation of his own powerlessness. A giant, unstoppable obstacle he could do nothing about. He turned to run, to join the retreating crowd, when he heard a cry. "Ow!" He stopped. He looked back. Lying on the ground, trapped under a pile of rubble from the robot's emergence, was the kind girl from the entrance. Her leg was pinned. She looked up at the approaching behemoth, her face pale with terror. And in that instant, everything shifted. The fear vanished. The despair vanished. The analytical mind went silent. The memory of Bakugo's face, drowning in sludge, flashed through his mind. Her face, pale with fear. It was the same. A person was in danger. A person needed to be saved. My legs, they just started moving. He didn't run away. He ran towards it. As he sprinted towards the zero-pointer, something finally answered his call. It wasn't a gentle awakening. It was a cataclysm. Power, raw and untamed, surged through his body. It was 1,000 lightning storms crammed into his veins, a supernova igniting in the marrow of his bones. Red, crackling energy, like angry veins, spiderwebbed across his skin. His vision swam. It was too much. It was going to tear him apart. This is it. I have to do it. All Might said to clench my butt cheeks and yell smash from the bottom of my heart. He channeled all of it. Every drop of that terrifying, world-breaking power. He focused it into his legs for a gigantic leap, and into his right arm for the punch that would save her. He was going to pour 100% of One for All into a single, desperate attack. He was going to be a grenade. He crouched, ready to spring, ready to sacrifice his body to save this one girl. And then, a new voice screamed in his head. It was not the calm, sad voice of his 16-year-old self. It was not the gentle, guiding tone of the Nexus. This was a shriek of pure, undiluted urgency. It was older, more strained, ragged around the edges with the echoes of 100 desperate battles. It cut through the roaring storm of One for All in his veins like a shard of ice. No! You idiot! Not like that! You'll obliterate yourself! The voice was a shock of cold water, halting him for a nanosecond. He found himself not in the battle center, but in that familiar, twilight void. But it was different now. The air crackled with static, the obsidian floor was fractured with lines of angry red light. And the figure before him was not a boy in a school uniform. This was a man. Early 20s, perhaps. He wore a hero costume that was clearly an evolution of Izuku's own initial design. The green jumpsuit was made of a more durable, armored material, battered and scarred. The mask was gone, and the man's face was harder, leaner, etched with lines of stress and exhaustion. His eyes were the same emerald green, but they were narrowed, frantic. This was a man who lived on the knife's edge. This was pro-hero Deku. The vision lasted less than a heartbeat, a split-second flash in the chaos of the moment. But the message was delivered with the force of a physical blow. Focus it! Don't be a grenade, be a bullet! 1 point! One for all isn't all or nothing! Channel it! Just your finger! Your finger, Izuku! Now! The connection shattered. He was back in the real world, the zero-pointer's massive fist descending. The voice's command was imprinted on his brain. Not a grenade, a bullet. 1 point. Your finger. It was a completely alien concept. How could he possibly contain a hurricane in a thimble? But he didn't have time to question it. He had to trust the frantic voice from his own future. He leaped. The power of one for all surged into his legs, and he rocketed into the air, a green blur soaring towards the heavens. He flew past the robot's waist, its chest, its massive head. As he reached the apex of his jump, directly in front of the robot's faceplate, he pulled his right arm back. The red energy still crackled around it, threatening to tear it from its socket. But instead of letting it consume his entire limb, he did as the voice commanded. He visualized it. He saw the raging river of power and, through sheer force of will, he tried to dam it, to force it down a new, narrow channel. He pushed it all, every ounce of that cataclysmic force, away from his arm, his torso, his shoulder, and funneled it down into a single, tiny focal point, the tip of his right index finger. His entire body screamed in protest. It felt like trying to force a star through a pinhole. But he held on. He aimed. He thrust his finger forward. He yelled the word that was the key, the mantra, the soul of this power. Smash! The result was not an explosion. It was an implosion. All the force that would have shattered his arm was concentrated into a single, hyperdense point of impact. When his finger touched the robot's face, the metal didn't just dent. It warped, it buckled, it collapsed inward as if struck by a miniature meteor. A shockwave, pure concussive force, erupted from the point of contact, blowing the robot's head clean off its shoulders and sending it flying backward. The massive chassis, deprived of its control unit, froze and began to topple away from the girl. The kickback was apocalyptic. A gunshot crack echoed through the arena as the bones in his finger and hand shattered instantly. The force traveled up his arm, dislocating his shoulder and fracturing his humerus. Pain, white-hot and absolute, exploded through him. But his arm wasn't a mangled, useless ruin. It was broken, agonizingly so, but it was intact. And then, gravity reasserted itself. He was hundreds of feet in the air, his body a ragdoll, with one useless arm and two legs that were already beginning to pulse with the agony of their own overuse. He was going to fall. He was going to die. He had saved her, but he was going to die. He saw the ground rushing up to meet him. He closed his eyes. Slap! A sharp sting on his cheek. He was floating again. He opened his eyes to see the kind girl, her face streaked with tears and dirt, holding her hand out towards him. She had pushed herself free from the rubble and used her quirk to negate his fall just before he hit the ground. She looked nauseous from the effort. Release! She gasped, and he fell the last few feet onto the pavement with a jarring thud. As she stumbled away to be sick, the air horn blared. Time's up! It was over. He lay there on the broken concrete, his body a symphony of agony. His right arm was a swollen, purple mess. His legs felt like they were filled with broken glass. But he was alive, and as the other candidates gathered around, staring first at the decapitated zero-pointer, and then at him with expressions of pure shock and awe, a single thought cut through the pain. I did it. I'm not a grenade. I'm a bullet. He had 1 point. 0 villain points, to be precise. But he had a broken finger to show for it. And for some reason, that felt like a victory. The week waiting for the results was torture. He lay in bed, his arm in a sling, his legs still aching. He replayed the exam over and over in his mind. He had scored 0 points. 0. All that work, all that struggle, and he had failed to meet the most basic requirement of the test. He had let All Might down. The Nexus remained silent. The frantic voice of pro-hero Deku did not return. He was alone with his doubts. When the letter from UA finally arrived, his hands trembled so much he could barely open it. His mother stood by, wringing her hands, her face a mask of anxious hope. Inside was a small metal disc. It flickered to life, projecting a hologram. It was All Might. I am here! A projection! He boomed. He explained that he was a new teacher at UA, a fact that made Izuku's mind spin. He recapped Izuku's performance on the written exam, which was excellent, but on the practical exam, All Might said, his tone turning serious. You scored a grand total of 0 points. Izuku's heart sank to the floor. This was it. The official confirmation of his failure. However, All Might continued, a grin spreading across his face. That was not the only way to pass this test. He raised a finger. The exam was not just about fighting villains. Ask yourself, how could a school that professes to train heroes reject someone who acted as heroically as you did? The screen behind him changed, showing a video feed. It was the girl from the exam, Ochako Uraraka, talking to Present Mike. Excuse me, sir? She was saying. That boy with the green hair, the one who looks plain. Can I give him some of my points? He saved me. He deserves to pass more than anyone. The screen showed other candidates. The engine-legged boy, Tenya Ida. I misjudged him. He understood the true nature of this test far better than I. Others chimed in, praising his incredible power and selfless actions. We at UA also judge on a different metric. All Might declared, his voice swelling with pride. Rescue points. A panel of judges awards them for acts of true heroism. Your actions moved us all. The screen flashed with a leaderboard. Izuku Midoriya villain points 0, rescue points 60. He was ranked 7th overall. He had passed. He was in. Izuku stared, unblinking, as the tears he had been holding back for a week finally broke free. They weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of pure, overwhelming joy. He looked at his mother, and she was crying too, her face a beautiful mess of relief and pride. You see, Izuku? She sobbed, hugging him tightly. I told you you were amazing. After the hologram ended, Izuku sat in his room, the acceptance letter clutched in his hand. He looked at his broken, healing finger. He had a quirk. He had a place at UA, and he had a secret weapon no one else did, a fractured, desperate road map to his own future. He now understood the Nexus wasn't just about encouragement. It was a crisis hotline. It was a lifeline thrown from a future that had clearly learned things the hard way. The first days at UA were a whirlwind. He was in Class 1A, the hero course. The serious boy was Tenya Ida. The kind girl was Ochako Uraraka, and to his eternal dismay, Bakugo was there too, his glare more intense than ever. Their homeroom teacher was Shota Aizawa, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. He immediately put them through a grueling quirk apprehension test, threatening the last-place student with expulsion. During the test, Izuku struggled. He couldn't use one for all on the 50-meter dash without shattering his leg. He couldn't use it for the grip strength test without crushing the machine and his own hand. He was coming in last or near last on every test. He was still quirkless for all practical purposes. It came down to the final event, the ball throw. This was his last chance. Midoriya. You're up, Aizawa said, his voice flat and bored. Izuku stepped into the circle, a softball in his hand. This was it. He had to use it. He took a deep breath, focusing, trying to channel that immense power into his arm, just like in the exam. He could feel the familiar, terrifying surge, the red veins of energy crackling up his limb. He was ready to sacrifice his arm for a good score. Suddenly, his hair stood on end. The power vanished. He threw the ball. It landed with a pathetic thud about 40 meters away. I erased your quirk, Aizawa said, his eyes glowing a menacing red, his capture weapon floating around him like angry snakes. It's not logical to have a student who continuously incapacitates himself. You can't save anyone if you're the first one who needs saving. You're a one-trick pony who breaks after every trick. You can't be a hero like that. He released Izuku from his quirk. You have one more throw. Impress me. The other students watched, whispering. Aizawa's words were brutal, but they were true. Izuku felt a flush of shame. His future self had warned him. Pro-hero Deku had given him the key, and he was still trying to use the whole sledgehammer. Don't be a grenade, be a bullet. He took a deep breath. He held the ball. He wasn't just going to reenact the entrance exam. He had to show he could learn. He had to show he could control it. He wound up for the throw. He let one for all flood his body, but this time, he didn't fight it. He guided it. He remembered the voice from the Nexus, the frantic command to focus. He let the power surge down his arm, but at the last possible second, just as he was about to release the ball, he funneled it all. He visualized the dam, the narrow channel, the pinhole. He forced the entirety of the pitch's power into the single point of contact where his index fingertip would press against the ball. He threw. The ball shot from his hand like a cannonball, a sonic boom cracking the air. It sailed up, a white speck against the blue sky, leaving a trail of pressurized air in its wake. He looked down at his hand. His arm was fine. His shoulder was fine. But his right index finger was swollen, purple, and clearly broken. A single, contained point of failure. Aizawa's device beeped. He held it up. 705.3 meters. The class gasped. Bakugo's jaw was on the floor, his face a mask of incandescent rage and disbelief. That power, he controlled it? He localized the damage? How? Aizawa looked from the score to Izuku's broken finger, and then into his eyes. He saw the pain, but he also saw the grim, determined triumph. A slow, predatory grin spread across the tired hero's face. Not bad, kid, he said, the corner of his mouth twitching. You're not entirely hopeless after all. Izuku clutched his broken finger, his vision swimming with pain, but his heart was soaring. He had done it. He had shown he could learn. He had taken the first real step on the fractured path of controlling this impossible power. He had listened to the desperate echo from his future, and for the second time, it had saved him. But a cold thought settled in his mind as he looked at his throbbing finger. If his pro-hero self had to scream that advice at him in a moment of crisis, how many times had he failed in that other timeline? How many bones had that future self broken before he finally learned the lesson? The path ahead was not just about getting stronger. It was about getting smarter. It was a long, painful road of trial and error, and he was only just beginning. The fractures in his bones were just the start. The real challenge would be navigating the fractured path of his own potential. The first weeks at Yui were a dream painted in the vibrant colors of exhaustion and exhilaration. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who once only dreamed of these halls, was now living within them. He was no longer just a fan, but a student, a colleague, a friend. He ate lunch with Ida and Uraraka in the bustling cafeteria, their conversations a cheerful mix of hero analysis and mundane gossip. He faced off against Bakugo in All Might's foundational heroics class, a battle that left him with more bruises but also a sliver of grudging, unspoken respect from his volatile rival. He was learning. Not just about history and math, but about himself. The quirk apprehension test had been a brutal but necessary lesson. He couldn't afford to be a grenade. The bullet method, channeling one for all into a single finger, was his only viable combat option, but it was a costly one. Each use meant another trip to Recovery Girl, another lecture on self-preservation, another excruciating healing process. He had 8 usable fingers and 2 thumbs. 10 shots. That was his limit. His life fell into a new rhythm. Yui by day, homework and quiet analysis in the evening, and a crushing new training regimen from All Might designed to build up his base strength so his body could handle more of One for All's output. The dream of cleaning the beach had been replaced by the reality of becoming a hero, and the work was tenfold. The Nexus, however, remained silent. After the frantic, life-saving intervention during the entrance exam, he had half expected more contact. He tried to induce it, staying up late, pushing himself to the point of collapse, hoping to reopen that channel to the future. But the void remained stubbornly out of reach. It seemed the connection was not something he could control. It was a crisis response system, an emergency broadcast from a future that was, for the moment, content to let him walk his own path. He was both relieved and anxious. The silence meant he was not in immediate, timeline-altering danger, but it also meant he was flying blind. The night before the class trip to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ, Izuku was hunched over his desk, poring over his notes. Not his hero analysis journal, but his personal one, the black notebook dedicated to the Nexus and One for All. Hypothesis. The clarity of the future self is tied to temporal proximity. Yui Deku, approximate 2 years future, was relatively clear, advisory. Pro-hero Deku, approximate 5 to 7 years, was more distorted, frantic, and specific. What about further? What would a 10-year, 20-year future self be like? Would the connection be too unstable? He yawned, his eyelids heavy. It had been a long day. Aizawa had run them ragged with rescue drills, and All Might's American Dream Plan 2.0 was relentless. His muscles ached with a deep, familiar soreness. He blinked, the words on the page blurring together. He fought to stay awake, wanting to finish one more analysis on the Hero 13, their instructor for tomorrow's lesson, but his body, as it had done once before, simply gave out. His head drooped, his pen slipped from his fingers, and his cheek found the cool wood of his desk. He fell into the waiting darkness, but this time, it was not the quiet, twilight void. He was plunged into chaos. There was no floor, no ceiling, just an endless, churning maelstrom of color and sound. It was like being inside a storm of shattered stained glass, fragments of light and shadow whipping past him. The air was thick with static, a roaring, oppressive sound that vibrated in his bones. And through the static, there were voices, not one voice. A chorus. They screamed and whispered, overlapping, contradicting, fading in and out of the roaring noise. They were all his voice, yet different, younger, older, calmer, more terrified. It was a cacophony of his own potential futures, all trying to speak at once. He clutched his head, overwhelmed, trying to latch onto a single, coherent thought in the hurricane of information. A tear is a trap! The shipwreck zone is, a young, panicked voice shrieked before being drowned out by a wave of static. A deeper, more resonant voice, one that sounded tired but authoritative, perhaps the pro-hero Deku from the exam, cut through the noise for a second. Aizawa-sensei, cannot fight him alone. Protect him! The Nomu is the key. The voice dissolved into a garbled screech. 13, the warp gate, the door. Another voice, thin and reedy, whispered urgently right next to his ear. Don't let them separate you. Kurojiri will. He's not the final boss. This voice was sharp, analytical, like a surgeon delivering a diagnosis. It felt closer in age to his current self. Shigaraki is a child. Look past the hand. The real threat is the one who sent him. The symbol of evil is watching. Protect Tsuyu, the water. Aizawa's eyes. 13 is a rescue hero, not a combatant. Her quirk is a liability up close. Nomu, shock absorption, regeneration, not brute force. Expose the fragments slammed into him, a barrage of psychic shrapnel. They were warnings, pieces of a puzzle he couldn't see, clues to a crisis he didn't know was coming. He tried to grab onto one thread to follow it, but another would scream for his attention. It was like trying to listen to a dozen radio stations at once, all broadcasting on the same frequency. The experience felt like an eternity and an instant. He felt his consciousness being torn apart by the sheer volume of information. The void fractured, the voices faded into a final, deafening roar of static, and he was violently ejected back into his own body. He gasped, shooting upright in his chair, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. His skin was slick with cold sweat. A splitting headache pulsed behind his eyes, a phantom echo of the psychic storm. He stumbled to his bathroom and retched into the toilet, his body convulsing from the sheer sensory overload. He knelt there on the cold tile, trembling, trying to piece together the nightmare. It wasn't a dream. It was the Nexus, but it had been corrupted. Overloaded. It was a chorus of warnings, all screaming about tomorrow. The USJ. Something terrible was going to happen at the USJ. Villains. A warp gate. A monster called Nomu. A leader named Shigaraki who wasn't the real threat. Aizawa in danger. 13 in danger. Tsuyu in danger. Traps in the water zones. He scrambled back to his desk, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his pen. He flipped to a clean page in his black notebook and tried to write it all down, but the fragments were already fading, like the details of a dream upon waking. The raw emotions remained, the terror, the urgency, but the specific words became slippery, elusive. USJ attack, he scribbled. Villains warp gate, Kurojiri? Shigaraki leader? Not the real boss. Monster Nomu regeneration? Shock absorption? Warnings, Aizawa fights alone danger. 13 close combat bad/door? Water zone, shipwreck, trap for who? Tsuyu? He stared at the disjointed notes. It was a prophecy of doom, written in gibberish. What could he do? Go to All Might? Tell him he had a bad dream? He had no proof, no coherent explanation. They would think he was cracking under the pressure. He could warn Aizawa-sensei, but with what? Be careful, I had a nightmare that a monster named Noma is going to fight you. He'd be sent to the counselor's office, not taken seriously. He felt a crushing sense of helplessness. He had been given a glimpse of the future, a chance to save his friends and teachers, but the information was so fractured it was almost useless. It was a map with all the street names erased. He barely slept the rest of the night, his mind replaying the chorus of screams. By the time he got on the bus the next morning, his face was pale, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Whoa, Midoriya, you look terrible," Kirishima said with a cheerful punch to his shoulder. "Too excited for rescue training to sleep? Something like that," Izuku mumbled, sinking into his seat next to Uraraka. "Are you okay, Deku-kun?" she asked, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You look really pale." "I'm fine," he lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just a headache." He couldn't tell them. He couldn't warn them without sounding insane. All he could do was watch. And wait. And be ready. The bus ride was a study in contrasts. His classmates were buzzing with excitement. Tsuyu Ajui sparked a debate about whose quirk was flashier, leading to a friendly argument between Kirishima and Bakugo. Aizawa, curled up in a yellow sleeping bag, snored softly at the front. It was so normal, so peaceful. But for Izuku, every cheerful laugh, every innocent comment, was underscored by the screeching static of his dream. The air itself felt heavy with unspoken menace. When they arrived at the massive dome of the USJ, their instructor was waiting. The space hero, 13. "Welcome, everyone!" 13 greeted them, her bubbly voice muffled slightly by her helmet. "I've been looking forward to working with you." As 13 began to explain the purpose of the USJ, to train them to use their quirks for rescue in various disaster scenarios, Izuku's eyes kept darting around. The plaza, the different disaster zones visible in the distance. A landslide, a fire, a shipwreck. A tear is a trap. The shipwreck zone is. His stomach clenched. He looked over at Tsuyu, who was listening intently, her frog-like features calm and composed. "Protect Tsuyu!" the voice had shrieked. Aizawa stepped forward. "All right, that's enough. Let's get started." And then it happened. The lights in the facility flickered and died. The central fountain sputtered and went still. In the center of the plaza, the air began to shimmer and distort. A swirling vortex of dark purple mist, like a wound in reality, opened up. Izuku's blood ran cold. The warp gate. A hand, pale and skeletal, emerged from the center of the mist. It was followed by a man, painfully thin, covered in disembodied hands that gripped his arms, his neck, his face. "Shigaraki, is this part of the training?" Kirishima asked, his cheerful demeanor evaporating. "It looks so real. Stay back," Aizawa commanded, his voice sharp as steel. He pulled his yellow goggles over his eyes. "Those are real villains," panic erupted. Dozens, then hundreds of villains began to pour from the warp gate, a motley collection of thugs and monsters, their eyes glinting with malice. And with them came two others. The swirling mist coalesced into a humanoid form wearing a bartender's suit, Kurogyri, and stepping out last was a hulking behemoth, a monster of dark purple muscle with an exposed brain and dead, unblinking eyes. Its beak-like mouth was fixed in a grotesque, permanent grin. The Noma. It was real. Everything was real. As his classmates reeled in shock and fear, Izuku's mind went into overdrive. The panic was there, a cold knot in his gut, but it was overridden by the frantic need to process the fragmented data he'd been given. Aizawa fights a lone danger. As Aizawa prepared to leap into battle, Izuku screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Aizawa-sensei, wait! You can't fight them all! That big one, the one with the exposed brain, he's not normal! You have to fall back." Aizawa glanced back at him, his expression unreadable behind his goggles. "A hero's work is never logical. 13. Protect the students. Kaminari, tried to contact the school." He didn't listen. He leaped down the massive staircase, his capture weapon flying, a one-man army against a horde. Izuku watched in horror. He knew what was coming. Kurogyri, the warped villain, materialized before the students, blocking their escape. Greetings. We are the League of Villains. We've taken the liberty of inviting ourselves into this haven of justice to say hello. And to have a word with the symbol of peace, All Might. He paused. But he doesn't seem to be here. Perhaps if we kill a few of his students, he'll deign to make an appearance. 13. The warp gate, the door. Before Kurogiri could make a move, 13 stepped forward, the cap on one of her fingertips popping open. Everyone, get behind me! 13, no! Izuku shouted. Your quirk, it'll be a liability up close. He's a warp gate, but it was too late. 13 activated her quirk, Black Hole, intending to suck the villain in. Kurogiri, however, was faster and smarter. He opened another warp gate directly behind 13. Her own devastating power was turned against her, the vacuum force sucking at her back, shredding her costume and the flesh beneath it. She screamed in agony and collapsed. Sensei! Uraraka cried. Kurogiri's mist expanded, enveloping the students. I will scatter you, and my comrades will have their fun. Perish! The world became a swirling vortex of purple. Izuku felt himself being lifted off his feet, the ground vanishing beneath him. He squeezed his eyes shut, the chaotic warnings from his dreams screaming in his mind. He landed with a huge splash, plunging into cold, dark water. He surfaced, gasping for air, and found himself in the shipwreck zone. The water was churning around a large, half-sunken vessel. He wasn't alone. Mineta was there, panicking and screaming, his purple ball-like hair bobbing on the surface. And a few feet away, her head just above the water, was Tsuyu Azui. The water is a trap! Protect Tsuyu, Midoriya-chan! Mineta-chan! Tsuyu called out, her voice calm despite the situation. What's the situation? Kero. Before Izuku could answer, the water around them began to roil. Villains with aquatic quirks surfaced, their grinning faces like something out of a horror movie, a man with a shark's head, another with tentacles, all closing in on them. See? One of them sneered. Kurogiri said he'd drop someone in here for us to play with. And he sent us 3 little tadpoles, Mineta screamed in terror. We're going to die. We're going to be eaten, Izuku's mind raced. The trap wasn't just that they were surrounded. It was a tactical trap. Tsuyu was a frog. She had the advantage in the water. But he and Mineta were liabilities. The villains knew this. They would target the weakest links first to get to the strongest. Tsuyu-chan, Izuku said, his voice surprisingly steady. He treaded water, his eyes scanning the villains, analyzing their quirks. What can you do? I can jump high, stick to walls, and extend my tongue up to 20 meters. I can also secrete a mildly paralytic toxin, but it's mostly just an irritant. Kero, Mineta-kun, your quirk, I can pull these balls off my head. They're super sticky to anything but me. If I pull too many, I start to bleed, he wailed. Sticky balls. Water. An idea, half-formed from desperation and analysis, sparked in his brain. Listen to me, Izuku commanded, his voice cutting through Mineta's panic. The villains think we're scared. They think they have the advantage. But they don't know what our quirks are. They're underestimating us. He looked at the villains closing in. Tsuyu-chan, you're the strongest one here in the water. But they'll try to overwhelm you. Mineta-kun, you are our secret weapon. Me? Mineta squeaked. Yes. They don't know how strong your quirk is. We're going to make them think we have some kind of massive power. We need to create a vortex, he explained his plan in frantic, whispered sentences. It was insane. It was a long shot. But it was better than waiting to be picked off. Ready? He asked. Tsuyu gave a determined nod. Mineta was still trembling but seemed to rally under the force of Izuku's conviction. Now! Izuku yelled. Mineta began frantically pulling the sticky purple balls from his head, tears streaming down his face as he tossed them into the water around the villains. At the same time, Izuku took a deep breath, submerged himself slightly, and aimed his finger at the water's surface beneath the center of the boat. He thought of the zero-pointer. He thought of Aizawa's disappointed stare. Don't be a grenade. Be a bullet. He channeled one for all into his left middle finger. The familiar, agonizing pressure built. He flicked his finger. Delaware smash! He didn't hit anything solid. Instead, he blasted the water itself. The force created a massive, concussive underwater explosion. A huge column of water erupted into the air, creating a swirling, violent whirlpool. The villains, caught completely by surprise, were thrown off balance, sucked towards the center along with Mineta's sticky balls. They collided, getting stuck to each other, forming a single, flailing, tangled mass of villainy. Now, Tsuyu-chan! Izuku yelled, his hand screaming in agony. Tsuyu's long tongue shot out, wrapping around his and Mineta's waists. With a powerful kick of her legs, she leaped from the water, carrying them both through the air and landing them safely on the deck of the ship. They stared back at the water, where a dozen villains were now helplessly stuck together in a giant, purple-dotted ball, bobbing uselessly in the whirlpool. They had won. Mineta stared, dumbfounded, then burst into tears of relief. We did it! You're amazing, Midoriya! Izuku clutched his broken, purple finger, gritting his teeth against the pain. It had worked. The fragmented warning had saved their lives. But as he looked back towards the central plaza, a cold dread washed over him. He could see Aizawa. He was a whirlwind of action, taking down villain after villain with his quirk and capture weapon. But he was tiring. And he was being herded, maneuvered, towards the real threat. The Nomu, Aizawa-sensei, cannot fight him alone. We have to get back, Izuku said, his voice grim. He needs help. They made their way carefully back to the edge of the plaza, hiding behind some fake rocks. The scene before them was horrific. Aizawa had been taken down. The Nomu had him, twisting his arms, slamming him into the ground. His teacher, one of the strongest pro-heroes he knew, was being broken like a twig, and standing over him was Shigaraki, scratching his neck with a manic energy. You're so cool, Eraserhead! Shigaraki rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. But he's just as strong as All Might. You're no match for him. Ida had escaped. Help was on the way. But it wouldn't be fast enough. Aizawa was about to die. Shigaraki turned his attention to them. He had seen them. He started towards them, his hand outstretched. Let's see if we can end this before the final boss arrives. Tsuyu and Mineta were frozen in terror. Shigaraki's decaying hand reached for Tsuyu's face. Izuku saw it all in slow motion. The hand? Tsuyu's wide, terrified eye. The memory of the voice. Protect Tsuyu! The other voice. He's not the final boss. The real threat is the one who sent him. In that split second, Izuku didn't think about his own safety. He acted on the fractured intelligence from the future. He launched himself from their hiding spot, not at Shigaraki, but towards the Nomu. He pulled his arm back, readying another Delaware smash. He wasn't aiming for Shigaraki. He was aiming for the monster holding his teacher. He had to create a distraction, to shift the focus. He had to bluff. Get away from him! Izuku roared, his voice filled with a desperate, convincing fury. He channeled one for all into his fist, the red veins crackling. He knew a punch wouldn't work. The voice had said shock absorption, regeneration. A direct attack was useless. But Shigaraki didn't know that Izuku knew. As Shigaraki paused, surprised by his sudden appearance, Izuku changed his target mid-scream. He wasn't yelling at Shigaraki. He was yelling at the Nomu. He's not the one you should be watching, monster! He screamed, pointing a trembling, non-broken finger at the creature. It's All Might! He's coming! And when he gets here, your master will be nothing but dust. It was a complete and utter bluff, a desperate gamble based on the whisper that Shigaraki was just a pawn. He was trying to provoke the true power in the room, to prey on the monster's programming, to appeal to the unseen master. It worked. For a critical half-second, the Nomu's dead eyes shifted from Aizawa to Izuku. Shigaraki himself froze, his hand inches from Tsuyu's face, his head tilting. My master, he rasped, intrigued and enraged by the boy's impossible knowledge. That momentary distraction, that half-second of confusion, was all that was needed. Boom! The doors to the USJ were blown off their hinges. And standing there, silhouetted against the light, was a figure of immense power. He was not smiling. His face was a mask of cold, righteous fury. It's fine now. All Might said, his voice dangerously low. For I am here,